Have you ever received a bill from your own parents? Not rent, not hospital fees, a full invoice for raising you, itemized down to birthday parties, piano lessons, and even your mom's emotional labor. Total due, $190,000. The voicemail said, "Family emergency." But when I arrived, the house was spotless, the tea was still warm, and the only thing waiting for me was a manila envelope slid across a polished coffee table. Inside, a breakdown of my life, turned into line items with timestamps, interest rates, and footnotes like my existence had been run through QuickBooks. I'm not a lawyer, but I'm the only one my grandfather ever trusted with his ledgers, not just the numbers, but the people behind them. In this video, I'll show you how I uncovered a forged will, the audio that exposed everything, and how I reclaimed it all, without rage, but with receipts, a hidden letter, a notarized addendum, a 6-minute recording that changed everything. If you've ever felt like you owed your family just for existing, don't scroll. This might be the map you've been waiting for. Before we dive into the story, I'd love to get to know you a little better. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. That way I can send you a special shout out. Now let's begin our story together. I knew something was off the moment I pulled into the driveway. My mother's voicemail had said, "Family emergency," but the lawn was trimmed, the flower beds were manicured, and the porch light flicked off right on cue with the sunrise. This wasn't the chaos of a crisis. This was a scheduled performance. I stepped out of my car, adjusting the sleeves of my coat even though it wasn't cold, just nerves. The early March air smelled like pine mulch and lavender disinfectant, two things that didn't belong together, yet somehow always did outside my childhood home. The door was already ajar, just slightly, enough to suggest invitation but not warmth. I pushed it open and was greeted not by hugs or rushed explanations, but by silence. Silence, and the familiar creak of polished cherrywood floors beneath my boots. "Upstairs?" I called out, my voice louder than I intended. No reply, just the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the foyer. It was always set 5 minutes ahead, my mother's idea of punctuality training. In the living room, everything was in its place. Two in place. Not a pillow out of line, not a magazine corner turned. My parents sat on the cream couch like portraits, porcelain cups in their hands. Eric was perched in the armchair, legs crossed, his phone face down on the glass coffee table, a rare sign of attention, or maybe amusement. "Nat," my father said, his voice nearly a whisper. Not weak, just reluctant. My mother didn't speak. She just reached to her right and slid a manila envelope across the table like it was a legal handoff. The envelope scraped softly against the lacquered surface, stopping directly in front of me. "What is this?" I asked. "A record," she said, "of what you owe." I didn't sit down. I didn't touch the envelope, just looked at it. The edges were too crisp, too straight, like they'd been ironed. "Is this a joke?" Eric chuckled. "Not unless you find interest rates funny." I opened it. 3 pages stapled. Line items in bold, timestamps, amounts, totals, an actual invoice, private school tuition, K-12, $91,000 after-school piano lessons, $14,600 birthday parties, 2001-2010, $6,400 orthodontics, braces, 2007, $3,200 grocery supplementation, organic diet preferences, $8 to $50 mother's emotional labor, household management, $31,500 transportation, non-shared vehicle, gas, insurance, $9,000 miscellaneous, camp fees, prom dress, SAT prep, $26,250 total, $190,000. I blinked at it. My eyes were dry, but my spine tingled. No explanation, no apology. Just footnotes and numbers, like my life had been run through QuickBooks. I looked up. My mother sipped her tea. My father avoided my gaze, focusing instead on a spot just left of the fireplace mantel. Eric was smirking now, fingers drumming faintly on the table. "And what exactly am I meant to do with this?" My mother leaned forward, smoothing her skirt. "We simply believe in accountability, Natalie. You've benefited from 2 decades of investment. This is just balancing the scales. You called me here for a family emergency. And isn't a financial imbalance between family a form of emergency? She countered, as if this was a TED Talk and not a blindsiding. I lowered the invoice, folding it neatly along the staple. When, I said quietly, did I stop being your daughter and become your debt? My father inhaled but didn't speak. Eric let out a little puff of air like a held-in laugh. Look, Nat, he said, I hope you brought your checkbook. I turned to him, finally sitting down, resting my hands on my lap. No, I said, but I brought receipts. That wiped the smirk clean off his face. No one spoke for a long moment. The porcelain clinked softly as my mother set her cup down. Her nails tapped the edge of her saucer like Morse code, controlled but pointed. My gaze shifted to the fireplace. Above it, the same family portrait from when I was 12 still hung in its ornate gold frame. My smile in that photo was wide, maybe a little crooked from new braces. I remembered the day. I remembered trying not to blink, but I also remembered what happened afterward. How I spilled fruit punch on the carpet and got a silent treatment that lasted a week. A week. Over juice. That had been my first real taste of consequences. I stood, placing the invoice carefully back on the coffee table. I'll get back to you, I said, not waiting for a reply. I walked out, the envelope untouched, the air still cold. As I stepped outside, the wind picked up. Not a howl, just a whisper. Like something had shifted, something had. There's a kind of silence that only exists in early spring, when the rain hasn't quite stopped, but the sun hasn't committed either. My apartment held that silence now. Even the old fridge, usually groaning every hour, seemed to understand it wasn't the time. I sat cross-legged on my rug, envelope still untouched on the table behind me, staring at a plastic storage tote I hadn't opened in 5 years. The label, faded and curling at the corners, read, Box 22, Sharpie, my grandfather's handwriting. I could still hear him say it aloud. Always number things, Nat. Chaos is just unfiled order. It had been crammed in the back corner of his attic, behind musty sleeping bags and a box of rusted lanterns. I hadn't gone looking for it, not at first, but something inside me, the same something that hardened when Eric smirked, told me it was time. I cracked the lid open. The attic dust clung to the edges of the folders like it was guarding secrets. Manila files, accordion pouches, a stack of yellowed envelopes wrapped in twine. I dug through until my fingers brushed thick cardstock, legal parchment, weighted and official. And then I saw it. A stamped file marked Addendum to Will, October 2016. Notarized, dated, tucked between property ledgers and dividend reports. I held it like it might burn me. My chest tightened as I scanned the words, line after line, until I saw my name. Bold, intentional. All rental properties and trust assets shall pass to Natalie Quinn, in full and without condition, effective upon my passing. I didn't cry. Not yet, but my hands started to tremble. Below the addendum was a smaller envelope, cream-colored, sealed in wax with the same emblem that hung in Granddad's study, the pine tree. I broke the seal. Inside, a letter. Nat, if you're reading this, someone's tried to outplay me. I know how Linda thinks. I know she'll push you when your guard is down, but I've filed this properly, just in case she plays her hand. You are the only one who ever asked about the ledgers, not just the money, but the people. Don't let them twist this into guilt. Love you always. Walter. The attic suddenly felt too tight, too small. I took the documents, tucked them into my bag, and left without looking back. Mr. Donnelly's office hadn't changed. It still smelled like old cedar and forgotten ink, and the chair in the corner still had the rip in the armrest from when I was 6, and threw a tantrum over a broken pen. He greeted me without surprise. Just a quiet nod and a gentle, "It's been a while." I laid the addendum on his desk, along with the letter. He adjusted his glasses, then slowly leaned back as he read. I watched the crease form between his brows. "This is his handwriting," he murmured, "and his usual phrasing. See here, he always used in full and without condition, as most attorneys default to without contest. Small but consistent." I let the words settle. "Then why," I asked, "does the official probate record list a different clause?" Donnelly looked up. "Because what was filed with the court didn't include this addendum." I blinked. Meaning? Meaning someone presented a will that was incomplete or edited. He rose, walking slowly to the tall cabinet behind him, pulling out a thick file marked Quinn Estate. Inside was a copy, one I'd never seen. No addendum, no mention of me as sole beneficiary, just vague allocations to the family. And a power of attorney granted to Linda Quinn, dated March 2017. I sat back. That date, it rang too loud to be coincidence. "That's the week Granddad died," I said. "He was in hospice, barely lucid." Donnelly nodded grimly. "And yet the signature on this form is clean. No trembling, no deviation. That's rare for someone sedated." I saw it then. Not just the forged document, but the moment she'd set it up. I was standing at his bedside, holding his hand. Machines beeped slowly in the background, and Linda had leaned in close, whispering, "Just sign it, honey. It's nothing. Just a release. I'll handle the rest." I had nodded. I had trusted. Grief fogs everything, and trust is a lens that blurs red flags into rose-colored smudges. Now, sitting in Donnelly's office, the fog was gone. I asked for copies, originals if possible. He agreed, said he'd assist quietly. That word, quietly, meant something now. It meant survival. Back home, I didn't unpack my bag. I didn't eat. I just opened my laptop and created a new folder. Quinn Estate, evidence. I added PDFs, photos, a scan of the letter. My hands didn't shake this time. They moved with purpose. And then, as I went to close the window, I saw it. A file on my desktop I hadn't touched since 2018. I didn't remember naming it, didn't remember saving it. March 2017. Phone recording MP3. I stared at the blinking icon. Then I pressed play. I didn't sleep that night. I watched the digital clock blink from 1 hour to the next while the file sat on screen. Its title, a dare I wasn't ready to accept. When dawn finally crawled through the blinds, I clicked play. At first there was only the hum of an open line, the faint clatter of porcelain in the background. Then Linda's voice, crisp and close, as if she were leaning over the phone. "We can't keep waiting, Greg. Dad's fading, and the lawyer says a signed addendum will stick if it's witnessed." Greg answered, quieter, almost coaxing. "It'll be fine, honey. Just keep it simple. Natalie lives across the country. She won't check." My breath snagged. I heard another sound, a shuffle, and then my grandfather, weak but still steady. "I already told you. The properties stay in Natalie's name. She's earned them." A pause. "Don't make me repeat myself, Linda." Her reply came sharp as a snapped twig. "Then we'll do it the other way." The recording clicked off. 6 minutes total. 6 minutes that cracked everything open. I replayed it twice, memorizing every hesitation, every scrape of teacup. Then I began to work. By mid-morning, the living room floor was buried beneath piles of paper, scanned bank ledgers, notarized copies Mr. Donnelly had emailed overnight, my own carefully typed notes in blue ink. I labeled each stack with neon sticky flags, color-coded for property deeds, trust withdrawals, and forged signatures. Control through order, Granddad would have been proud. When the printer ran out of paper, I walked to the tiny copy shop 2 blocks over. The bell above the door gave a tired jingle. The air smelled of toner and lukewarm coffee. I handed the clerk my flash drive and waited while the machine spat out page after page of truth, the rhythm steady, almost soothing. Every sheet that slid into the tray felt like a heartbeat returning to normal. I sorted the sets into matching folders, slipped them into a messenger bag, and headed downtown. The cafe Aunt Sandy liked was wedged between a secondhand bookstore and a shoe repair shop. Inside, the tables were mismatched oak, and the mugs looked rescued from estate sales, each one different, each with a past. She was already there, stirring sugar into her tea, eyes fixed on the swirl. Sandy hadn't been at yesterday's ambush. She'd moved 3 states away years ago, escaping, her word not mine, the tension. Still, she was family, and family in our world meant orbiting the same sun, even if you lived in a different sky. Nat? Her voice wavered when she saw the folders. I slid into the seat across from her and produced noise-canceling earbuds along with my phone. "I need you to listen," I said. No accusation, no plea, just plain fact. She hesitated only a second before settling the buds in place. I pressed play. I watched the color drain from her cheeks, watched her fingers tighten around the stoneware mug, watched them loosen when my grandfather's voice surfaced. Fragile, but firm. When the recording ended, she removed the earbuds, folded her hands, and stared at the wood grain between us. "They made it sound like you didn't care," she whispered. "Said you were too busy for family matters." I said nothing. There was nothing to add. Sandy let out a long breath. "I always wondered why your grandfather stopped inviting me for Christmas. Linda said he was paring down tradition. But after hearing that..." Her voice cracked. She reached for a napkin and dabbed at the corner of her eye. "I need a witness," I said gently. "Someone who remembers how things actually happened." She looked up, and for the first time I saw resolve where only guilt had been. "You have one," she said. "Use me." We talked through details, dates, hospital visits, conversations she could swear to under oath. When she signed her name at the bottom of a short affidavit, her hand didn't shake. Outside, the clouds rolled apart, letting a sliver of sunlight spill onto the sidewalk. I walked Sandy to her car, hugged her goodbye, and headed back to the copy shop. One last thing. I asked the clerk for a single USB drive with a mahogany casing, something that wouldn't look accidental. He handed me one lined in dark velvet. It felt serious, the way a gavel might feel in the palm even before it strikes wood. Back at my apartment, I copied the audio file, the scanned addendum, and the affidavit onto the drive. I wrote a clean label in blue ink, supporting Exhibits AC. Then I slipped the USB into its velvet sleeve and tied it closed with twine. A small handwritten card followed. For the next family meeting, I placed everything, drive, card, my newly tabbed folders, into a sturdy leather portfolio. The zipper rasped shut, final and sure. I set the portfolio upright against the wall by the door, ready for when the call would inevitably come. "You wanted a transaction," I murmured to the quiet room, smoothing the creases in my coat as though I were standing before an audience. "Let's finish the ledger." The silence answered like an oath. I parked at the curb, engine idling while rain freckled the windshield. Through wavering glass, I could see the front windows glowing a dull amber. No ambulance, no frantic shadows, just the same stage-set neatness I'd left behind. They wanted to talk things through. Fine. The portfolio on the passenger seat contained Exhibits A through E, alphabetized, cross-referenced, and ready. Inside, the house felt 5 degrees colder than before, though the thermostat hummed. The overhead lights were dimmed, casting long shadows along the hallway. That hallway used to smell like Sunday roast. Today it smelled only of lemon polish and a hint of fear. The living room had been rearranged since my last visit. Chairs formed a neat circle around the coffee table, as if someone had Googled informal mediation. A porcelain tea set rested at the center, untouched, steam-long, vanished. Greg sat stiff-backed, hands folded. Eric lounged with forced casualness, but his tapping heel betrayed nerves. Linda stood near the mantel, posture faultless, lips pursed so tight they were almost colorless. Behind an empty chair, Aunt Sandy hovered, eyes down, fingers intertwined. No hugs, no greetings, just expectation. I slid the leather portfolio onto the coffee table. The zipper's rasp cut across the silence like a zipper on a body bag. 5 tabbed folders fanned out in a tidy stack. On top, the velvet USB case. Linda broke first. "Natalie, we want to resolve this without unnecessary drama." "Drama," I repeated, easing into my chair. "All right, let's define it." "Dear friend, what would you do if you were in my shoes? I bet you can't guess what's coming next. But before we go any further, drop a 5 in the comments if you're still with me, because what happens next might just leave you speechless." I pressed the portable speaker's power button. A blue light blinked. I set the USB drive into the port and glanced at Greg. "You remember this conversation," I said. "March 2017? He swallowed but didn't answer. I pressed play. Static popped. Then Linda's voice filled the room, warm and coaxing. "He's already confused, Greg. Just have him sign while he's lucid enough to hold a pen." Greg's response followed, flat and pragmatic. "Natalie lives across the country. She won't check." Eric's foot stopped tapping. Linda took a single step forward. "Turn that off." I raised a hand, palm down. The recording continued. My grandfather insisting the properties remain in my name. Linda insisting on reallocation. When it ended, the room exhaled as one organism. "This is manufactured," Linda said, voice trembling but measured. "Anyone can splice audio." I opened folder A, the original will addendum, notarized, embossed, time-stamped. Folder B, my grandfather's letter. Folder C, the forged power of attorney, signatures too clean for a dying man. Folder D, a sworn affidavit from Aunt Sandy, recounting Linda's late-night estate meetings. Folder E, bank ledgers showing trust withdrawals within 48 hours of the forged document. Paper whispered as I laid them out like playing cards. Greg leaned in, face draining. Eric looked at each page as though the words might morph into something kinder if he stared long enough. Linda reached for the speaker, but Sandy stepped forward, blocking her. "Let her speak," my aunt said, voice steady. "We're owed that much truth." I met my mother's gaze, felt the old instinct to flinch, and didn't. "You've framed this as an accounting issue," I said softly. "So let's keep it in the language you prefer." From my bag, I pulled a single envelope addressed to Linda and Greg Quinn. Return receipt requested. "This is my intention to file a civil fraud suit in Lane County. It seeks full restitution of assets, punitive damages, and legal fees. You have 10 days to respond." Eric whispered, "Mom?" Linda's control finally cracked. She lunged toward the speaker. I didn't move. Sandy's hand landed on Linda's wrist, firm. The porcelain teacup rattled on its saucer, the only sound in the room. "This isn't an ambush," I said, voice level. "It's a reckoning. You chose the battleground the moment you sent me an invoice for being born." Greg wet his lips. "We can negotiate." "You already negotiated," I cut in. "With yourselves. Without me." Linda's shoulders squared. "You wouldn't dare take this public?" she hissed, each word clipped. I held her gaze, unblinking. "Watch me." Her eyes flicked to the folders, to the USB, to the affidavit bearing her sister-in-law's signature. She looked, for the first time in my life, unsure of which mask to wear. Rain tapped harder against the window, the sound steady as a metronome. No one reached for the tea. I gathered the folders, aligned their edges, slid them back into the portfolio one by one, order reclaiming chaos. I retrieved the velvet USB, placed it atop the envelope, and pushed both toward Linda. "Copies," I said, "in case you misplace anything." Eric whispered something that might have been my name, but I'd already risen. Aunt Sandy looked at me, apology and relief mingling in her expression. I gave her a small nod, gratitude without words. At the doorway, I paused, letting the weight of the house settle behind me. My voice was quiet, but it carried. The next conversation will be in a building with marble floors and a docket number, I said. Bring counsel. Then I left them to the rain and the cold tea, their own voices still echoing in the room where they thought I'd sit quietly forever. The mediation center in downtown Portland hid behind tinted glass and an unremarkable brass plaque that read, Dispute Resolution Services. Nothing grand, nothing public, precisely the way my parents preferred their confrontations. The lobby smelled of recycled air and overbrewed coffee. A receptionist in a gray sweater asked me to sign in, then pointed toward conference room C. Beige walls, boxy chairs, a humming HVAC vent in the ceiling, neutrality rendered in drywall. I took the seat farthest from the door, straightened the cuffs of my blazer, and set my single manila folder on the table. Inside were 2 sheets of paper. I only needed 2. Fairness, distilled. Linda and Greg arrived together. They looked smaller than I remembered, as if the long drive had deflated them. Their attorney, a man with thinning hair and an expensive briefcase, introduced himself to the mediator, then to me with a polite nod that said he understood exactly which side of the table held leverage. Eric followed a step behind, hands in the pockets of a wool coat that looked borrowed. The mediator, Judge Harper, retired, adjusted his glasses and reviewed our names. Purpose of today, he began, is to settle without litigation. Miss Quinn, you requested the session, so the floor is yours. I slid the folder forward. The terms are clear. Full restoration of the trust assets to my sole control, immediate withdrawal of my parents from the family LLC, and a mutual no-contact agreement after execution. The attorney leafed through his notes. My clients are willing to restore the assets, but they propose joint administration for transparency. I met Linda's eyes. I'm done being audited by people who sent me an invoice for existing. Judge Harper tapped a pen against the table, soft but deliberate. Let's hear the rationale, Miss Quinn. I nodded. Joint administration would recreate the same control dynamics that led us here. This is not about punishment. It is about preventing repeat misconduct. A faint click echoed as Greg uncapped his pen, then recapped it, the motion as restless as his gaze. Eric watched him, not me. I wondered what story they had told my brother during the drive. Perhaps that I was ungrateful, unreasonable, the family storm. Now he sat seeing the debris for himself. Linda smoothed a crease in her blazer. Natalie, families share. That is how trust works. Trust, I replied, is not a ledger item. Judge Harper leaned back. Mrs. Quinn, earlier recordings indicate a deliberate concealment of material facts. Given that history, joint control seems impractical. The attorney murmured to Linda. She stiffened, then turned toward the judge. We accept the restoration, but we request supervised transfer. Mr. Donnelly's face appeared on the wall monitor, zoom from his office in Eugene, a shelf of worn casebooks behind him. Supervision is unnecessary, he said calmly. The trust deed never authorized their control in the first place. Judge Harper made a notation. We will proceed with Miss Quinn's draft. Greg signed first. His signature wobbled halfway through, as if muscle memory had lost its roadmap. Linda's turn came next. She held the pen like a weight, staring at the page. For a moment, I thought she might refuse. Then her hand began to move, slow, deliberate loops spelling out the name she had used as shield and sword. The pen clicked when she set it down, a metal heartbeat in the hush. Eric leaned forward, eyes on the ink. Something in his posture sagged, as though the foundation beneath a story had collapsed. He wasn't angry at me. I could see that now. He was angry at the math, at what happened when numbers were forced to tell the truth. Judge Harper collected the documents, scanned the signatures, and clipped them together. Final clause, he said, reading aloud. All parties acknowledge this agreement resolves the dispute in full. No further claims. No future contact unless expressly invited. He looked at me. Anything you wish to say for the record? I laid my palms flat on the table. The room waited. I imagined filling the silence with every memory that had led here. Birthday parties budgeted into invoices, whispered signatures in a hospital room, a grandfather's letter dipped in love and warning, but words felt redundant. "No," I said. "The silence will speak loud enough." Judge Harper nodded and stood. Session adjourned. We exited in file. The corridor was cooler than the conference room, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Linda walked faster than Greg, her heels clicking like impatient metronomes. The attorney murmured his condolences to no one in particular. Mr. Donnelly's video window blinked out behind the closing door. Outside, rain draped the city in a muted curtain. I hugged my coat tighter and stepped beneath the overhang. The gray, for all its bleakness, felt like clean slate. Footsteps approached from behind. Eric stopped beside me, hands shoved deep in his pockets. Water pooled at the curb, reflecting streetlights that had flicked on early. He stared at the pavement as he spoke. "Did you ever want to stay?" His voice was low, flat, the question of a child who finally realized the rules had been rigged. I looked at him. Really looked. The slump of shoulders, the bewilderment in eyes that had relied too long on someone else's version of family. My reply was gentle but uncompromised. I wanted, I said, to be chosen. The rain kept falling, steady and impartial, as he absorbed the weight of that sentence. Neither of us moved. Somewhere inside the building, a door latched shut, sealing the final paperwork. The sound carried through the glass like the last tick of a metronome before the music changes key. I woke to the smell of coffee and juniper carried in on the high desert air. Sunlight slipped through the single window of my studio in Bend, laying a pale gold stripe across the polished concrete floor. I'd slept on a futon by choice. After Portland, I wanted a room that echoed until I decided what belonged in it. The kettle clicked off and I poured 2 fingers of coffee into a plain mug. No cream, no sugar. Truth, I'd decided, shouldn't be sweetened. A delivery truck rumbled away just as I opened the door. On the step sat a package wrapped in brown paper. No return label, only my name in Aunt Sandy's cursive. I carried it inside, heart tapping faster than the rain ever had. Beneath the paper was a cedarwood box, smooth as river stones, my name carved on the lid. The scent, sharp, clean, pulled me straight back to my grandfather's workshop, where shavings curled like ribbon and he'd tell me, "Every knot is a story the tree survived." I lifted the latch. Inside, a sealed envelope rested atop folded deeds and a small brass key. On the back of the envelope, in Granddad's steady hand, was a single line. "My only fear is she won't get this." The paper crackled as I broke the seal. "Nat, you once asked why I kept ledgers in pencil before moving them to ink. Pencil forgives. Ink records. Life needs both. They'll tell you money measures a person. They're wrong. Character does. You were always mine to protect. They chose fear. You chose truth. The cabin on Eagle Lake is yours. I finished it the summer you turned 10. You hammered the last plank, remember? I left it in the deed, but I hid the papers so only you would find them. If you're reading this, it means you reached for honesty even when it hurt. I'm proud of you, and I trust you to decide who shares that porch. Love you always, Walter." I read it twice, lips moving, as if sounding it out made it more real. Then I touched the key, still warm from the box. Its teeth were worn, the metal dulled by years of pocket travel. I closed my fingers around it and felt a quiet click inside my chest, like a door easing open. Later that week, I drove east, the Cascades rising behind me, the high desert unfolding ahead in muted greens and browns. The road to Eagle Lake narrowed to gravel, then to packed dirt lined with tamarack and lodgepole pine. When the trees parted, the cabin appeared, a modest A-frame, cedar shakes grayed by sun, windows clouded with dust. It looked abandoned, yet patiently waiting. The key turned without protest. Inside, particles of light floated through still air. The table we built together was there, its surface scarred with old nail marks. A single rocking chair faced the lake. I ran a hand over the wood. Dust traced the lines of my palm like a map. I opened the windows, and cold, clean air rushed in, carrying the hush of water lapping the shore. Outside, the lake mirrored a sky so blue it almost hurt. I breathed deeply, the breeze laced with the faint sweetness of early sage. First, I swept, small strokes, steady rhythm. Then I wiped the panes, laid a fresh strip of linen across the table, stacked the unopened deeds next to Granddad's letter. The quiet work felt like stitching torn fabric. Simple, repetitive, essential. That evening, as sun dropped behind ponderosa silhouettes, I stood on the porch with a satchel of lavender starters I'd bought in town. Granddad once said lavender was a promise plant. You put faith in the small and waited for fragrance. I knelt, pressed each root ball into the earth just off the steps, and whispered a thank you with every pat of soil. The last light-streaked rose across the water. I pulled out the letter one more time and read the final line aloud, voice steady in the open air. Let this be your beginning, not their ending. The lake answered with a gentle hush against the shore, as if agreeing. I leaned the shovel against the railing. My hands smelled of cedar and crushed lavender. Tomorrow I'd varnish the table, maybe sand the porch. Next week I'd invite Aunt Sandy and Elise, my cousin who'd written to say she, too, had letters tucked away. We would piece together the stories that had been folded out of sight. I glanced at the neat mounds of soil, the small green shoots barely visible in twilight. Next season, I told them, you'll bloom, so will I. Inside, the cabin's walls glowed with soft lamplight, warm as a held breath. I stepped over the threshold, closed the door behind me with quiet finality, and let the night settle, not as an ending, but as the first calm note of a life finally played in my own key. The scent of fresh-turned earth and lavender still lingers on my hands, reminding me that even the smallest root can anchor a new beginning. I've learned that justice may settle the books, but only truth sets a heart straight, and when we choose honesty over fear, we inherit more than any deed can list. So if you're carrying an unpaid hurt, speak it with kindness. The reckoning may be hard, yet the peace afterward is soft as evening light on a quiet lake. If this story touched a corner of your own, I'd be grateful to hear how you've found, or are still searching for, your rightful place.